world is really dark and scary, and it gets increasingly that. It's so hot. It's so miserable. Nothing is doing what it was supposed to do. No. And it's scary. So let's all hold hands through the dark.
Let's all hold hands. That's what I want.
Okay.
Across America. I'm kidding. Okay.
Hi, I'm Veronica.
And I'm Veronica.
And we're the Veronicas.
Yeah.
Which is actually a great band, actually.
So, yeah, I remember them.
No, we're the Ghouls Next Door, your media literacy show from a horror lens, where we explore the real-life, historical, societal influences behind our cinematic fears. And as part of our Teenagers Scared the Living Shish out of Me, we are covering Heathers, the 1988 cult classic about teens.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, it's about teens. It's about society. It's doing something.
It's doing something. It's a dark comedy that's, I think it's very much a product of its time. Its humor, even like the dark comedy aspects of its humor, is definitely different from our dark humor. If we were to have those, I just think like the things that people thought were funny to do or say or was acceptable in 1988 are not acceptable now.
Yeah, that's the main thing.
I don't think it's gonna hit the same way. Yeah, and I had never watched Heathers before this.
Me neither.
So I put it on the list because I have wanted to watch it, and I've heard really great things. I know people really go hard for it, and I also am obsessed with parts of the musical. Although I tried to watch the musical and I couldn't. I was like, I need to know what this film's about first
before I
go into the musical version of it. We did not watch the new Heathers, and I've heard terrible things, so I don't think I will.
TV show version.
Yeah, whatever it is.
Yeah.
With the current young people.
Yeah, I saw one positive review for it, but other than that.
I saw a lot of negative reviews that say that it misses the entire point. Because it's like, I think they blame like the wokeifying of it. But like I think it suffers that thing where people go too far into like cleaning up a mess that they miss the point of the mess. Where people like try to fix like the Avatar. When they took away all of the like the problems because
where they
we're gonna mitigate some of the pressures, like we're gonna make these characters different and have like different struggles, but it's like no, but they have to have like when you first meet a character, there's like bad things are supposed to happen and there should be growth. Like you need to give them room to grow. If you just hand them to us totally fine, what are we watching? So like and
it kind of like a little bit like sums up the Gen Z dilemma where like you can't even fail graceful, like you're not even given that opportunity. You have to just be perfect at all times. So like it kind of did that. I mean, I haven't seen it, but like that's based on what you said. It makes sense that they kind of just were like, well, we don't want growth because growth implies that was bad, and was bad means canceled, and then we can't have it. So,
exactly. I think that's what it was that they were like, they took away all the parts of it, and it's not for everyone. I don't think Heathers was necessarily for us. Like I totally get it now, and I understand what they were doing when it was made and what it was juxtaposing, like all of those things, super valid. And I'm like, absolutely understand its place in, the film history and like what it was doing. And I also acknowledge the immense impact that it's had on media that did shape me growing up. Like we're going to cover Jawbreakers, which I did really love. Mean Girls we're not going to cover, but is literally a spiritual successor to this. Like, it has, you know, quotes from Heather's, and it's the brother of the writer who did Mean Girls. So like, I can acknowledge those impacts. It's just like, that wasn't written for me. So when we take like a remake of it and try to make it for someone like me, you've missed it, because that's not what it was supposed to be doing. And so like, if you're gonna, like, you have to keep the same commentary and growth, and it has, like, the Heathers have to be bad in a very specific way, and the world has to be bad in a very specific way. And this is very clearly a made up world. It's very, like, don't behave like as dramatic as this. It's very, like, again, like Mean Girls, and they have like the weird animal fantasy.
I know you're talking about.
Like that, like that's, but the whole world is like that in this film.
It's like wacky and bizarre.
Yeah. And that's what's funny about it. Like, you can't go in and being like, they're, you know, trying to change the world. What they're doing is just being very exasperated about the world.
They're like dramatic performances of people instead of actual people in the Heather's original movie. And it's like, on purpose. They're exaggerations, essentially, on purpose.
Yeah, I think in our first watching it, I was like, what? I was like, I did not get it. It felt similar to, like, sometimes, like, when we watch a movie and I just have to sit there for a while. Like, Tatane did that to us. And then I'm like, I have to hear other people. Because I was like, I clearly wasn't accepting of the information in the right way. Things are going over my head. I'm not getting, like,
Oreos.
Like, but I'm also just, like, not getting context. I don't exist in that. Like, even, like, the fact that, like, a fun fact about the film, that a lot of the lingo and language is made up, and it's supposed to be absurd. One, because, like, he made up language so that it wouldn't date itself, right? So you wouldn't be using outdated language. You're using make-believe language, which that kind of same approach comes up in a movie later that we're going to cover. But I didn't know that. So I'm like texting my mom. I'm like, did you say, like, you know,
that's very...
Yeah, that's so very. Which, like,
get off my dick, or stop pulling my dick. That's what it was.
Yeah. Like, fuck me sideways with a chainsaw. My Mother Teresa. There's a lot of it that was just like, what? Or like, like, what did she say? Got a jet or something.
There was just like a lot of like really intense sayings that I was like, my qualm was that the acting.
Yeah.
It was,
and there's a reason for that. So,
oh really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so just before we get into like the analysis of it, I've learned a lot about this film in trying to understand it. As I'm that kind of person that I'm like, if I don't get something and I'm like, I need to do it, I dig in. So I learned a lot about this film. I know it inside out now. But one of the biggest things about this film is that when it was getting created, it was almost like this, not blacklisted, but like no one wanted to touch it. Like no one wanted to be a part of it. So they asked for a bunch of different actors to participate in different ways. And a lot of them would just say no. And a lot of people were just like, no, this is too, like, it's crazy. It's wild. So what we end up with is kind of like a hodgepodge of actors who are either weren't really expecting to be in it, or like the production team didn't like have them in mind for it, or we have people who were like fighting for specific roles and then got other roles, things like that. So like, also just as like a thing that's happening right now as we're recording this episode, Shannon Doherty, who plays one of the remaining Heathers, she's like the last like lead Heather, passed away yesterday. So, or actually she died not yesterday, but recently she passed away from breast cancer. So, but she originally applied for Veronica.
Okay.
She auditioned for Veronica and then got Heather. And there's like a few of them, but the main Heather Chandler, who was not the best of actresses, was Christian Slater's girlfriend at the time. So like, it's all these things where people were doing it. And Winona Ryder really fought hard to get the role of Veronica. Her biggest thing was that she had experienced something very similar to the plot, where someone had unalived themselves, and she saw that people were all of a sudden acting very bizarre in like falsifying their relationship with this person and putting them up on this pedestal. And she was like, this is so weird. Like, why are we glorifying this person? You didn't act like that when they were here. Like, this doesn't sit right with me. And so she fought really hard for the role. Originally, they said no because they said she wasn't attractive enough, which, like, excuse me.
Yeah,
like,
that's wild.
First of all, have you seen Winona Ryder for, like, her whole life? Ew, so gross. It's like, ugh. And then she came back. She did like a
super rude.
Yeah, she did like a little makeover, and they were like, sure. And I mean, I couldn't imagine anybody but Winona in this role, to be quite honest. So
yeah.
So those are my little tidbits, but that's why I think like the acting is so strange, and it does rely a lot on the, like, there's not a lot of room for improv because I feel like a lot of the things that are being said is very intentional, and it's like it's being like drilled at you. Like every single sentence is like here.
Exactly. It's not like, I guess, like, I don't remember thinking of like the ones that came after it, like the Jim Carrey movies where he improv'd a lot of his lines and stuff. Like, it wasn't for a comedian to be in this role. It was very much like, you say the lines how they are.
Yeah. You become this character, you do exactly what it is, and which is fine. Like, there's absolutely a place for that, and I think that they did fine. It just, it was jarring, and it took me a while to get over that hurdle of like the disingenuous acting, and because it was so heavy-handed.
My brain hates.
So obnoxious. Like, that's the best way to say this film. This film's very obnoxious. And again, not hating it. I just think like it was made for people in a different brain space than me. Yeah. But I appreciate it. I agree, and I think
it does a great job for what it's doing. Yeah.
So that being said, let's hop in so I can tell you what I did think about it, what I might have found from it. I did get a lot of help from the internet, like I said. So maybe stuff that you've heard, and maybe you have other thoughts. I would love to hear them. There's all kinds. There's like, honestly, there's so many rabbit holes I could go down about like, oh, what does the colors mean of the different girls and how that leads to like the Civil War? It's insane. Like, there's so many theories and things about like making this film bigger than it is. That's actually really exciting to me. And I do reference like at some point we get really silly, and I think it's like over the top where we're like, I think, sometimes you're putting like media literacy is super valid. And I think oftentimes when people put any type of meaning onto media, you're usually in some way correct. Like whether it was the creator's intention or not. I do think though that there is like a line, and sometimes people are just like somewhere else, and you're like, what are you even talking about?
Yeah.
that's nothing. Okay. If I, who like exaggerates everything in media, can say that's nothing, I think then we can acknowledge that's nothing.
I'm impressionable, so I'd probably be like,
wow, oh my God, you're not kidding.
It did mean something. Yeah. All right, continue.
So let me tell you about Heather. So firstly, it is from 1988, and it's about at Westerberg High, where cliques rule, jocks dominate, and all the popular girls are named Heather and Veronica. It's going to take Veronica and a mysterious new kid to give teen angst a body count. It's directed by Michael Lehman. Yeah. They're all named Heather. I was like, that's cute. One of the quotes that I put at the top of this section, just because I was like, this is so fun, is from one of the teachers after a student kills themselves, or a few of them kill themselves, and now it's like hysteria, right? They say, whether you decide to kill yourself or not is one of the most important decisions a teen can make. And it made me just think of like Hamlet. I was like, he handled it with it the best, didn't he? To be or not to be, that's the question, right?
That's
and he had some heavy stuff to work through, but that's like the birth of the teen angst. Like, who am I going to? I have to be like, I have to inherit this land, and I'm juggling like generational trauma and all kinds of other things, and my relationships all crazy, and they won't let me love who I want to love. It's a whole thing. Always if I could get back to Shakespeare, I will. Yeah. So Heathers is a dark comedy film that, through satire, challenges high school politics, social hierarchies, and the illusion of teenage depth. That's its intent, is what I will say. So blending Black humor with serious themes of violence, peer pressure, and the desire for acceptance, the film is a spectacle of teenage darkness, covering bulimia, suicide, date rape, homophobia, bullying, and self-harm, and many other things. It tackles literally everything that a teen can experience, and it does it in such a cavalier way that's both dismissive and also like acknowledging.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is it's pretty white, but other than that, yes, yeah.
It has remember it had the one black guy, and I was like, racism is dead.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah,
it's like, there he is. We got one.
Yeah, it's a diverse film.
Absolutely. It's very white, but product of its time, and it's also like, I think I am appreciative that it's white. I don't think I would have liked if they threw in like with The Craft, you have you know, the one character who's a black girl, and her trauma is very related to her being a black girl, and they did that in a way that could be relatable and also really triggering. There's some really awful things that are said. I don't think Heather's
wasn't ready to handle that subject in a way that was thoughtful. They handled a lot of subjects not super thoughtfully.
Honestly, shouldn't have probably handled like homophobia the way that they did, because it was still homophobic. Like, I don't feel that was that one's not good for. So it's like, you picked a lot of battles, and I'm glad that that's not one that you also
because they would have done a bad job. Yeah, they would have done a bad job. You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So bless them for that. Like, sometimes it's totally cool. It's totally cool to whitewash your whole cast, because don't be talking about other people's stories like that. Yeah. So yeah, very white, but very purposely white, and it does cover a lot, and so that's where I kind of felt like overwhelmed, but I think it was just trying to encompass the complexities of like all the things that youth have to juggle, especially at that time, and that even they're over it. Like the fact they're like bulimia is so 1983 or whatever, or 1987. Yeah. The girls like throwing up, and I was like, that also felt very Mean Girls-y. Like, we don't even do that type of harm anymore.
We have to do different harm.
Yeah. Find a different one. What's really fun, I will say, like, we'll probably rewatch it just to catch a lot more of the visual cues and things. I think I was just like overwhelmed by the what was happening and like the very loudness of it, so I couldn't catch a lot of the funny bits. But I did, thanks to some videos online, find that the opening scene shows the Heathers, which are these three popular girls, and they are the social elite of this fictional school, and they're shown as delicate and well-mannered, drinking tea. They're dressed in like their colors, the red, yellow, and green, with the little like schoolgirl patterned skirt and the blazer, and then they get up from their tea party, and they walk and they step over a fence, and they crush roses. Like, they just step on them, and then they move forward, and just like them leaving destruction in their wake, and it just sets the tone for like, these girls are chaos. Like, you think they're like these angelic cherub babies, and they're not. They're evil bitches. So the film follows Veronica Sawyer, who is part of the most popular clique at school, known as the Heathers. And the clique is led by Heather Chandler, lead Heather, along with Heather Duke and Heather McNamara. Veronica becomes increasingly fed up with the toxic and impressive behavior of the Heathers and how they treat other human beings. And she rants in her diary about the lack of depth in her social circle and a desire to be more. Whenever she's writing in her diary, she has her little monocle. Like, she's very clearly just trying to be like, I am so in touch with my life and my soul, and I'm better than these girls. And even as she tells her new beau, who's JD, she says, well, it's just like they're people I work with, and our job is being popular and shit. And that's just like the relationship she has is very transactional with these people. Like, she's fulfilling a role, and she knows that she has to do it. And so it's not really a companionship. They don't care about her. She doesn't care about them. They just have to fulfill these roles. And after a particularly unpleasant fight with lead Heather Chandler, Veronica makes some bad decisions that lead to Heather's death. Yeah. On the very top of the list of bad decisions is trusting JD. I will say that, like, I do appreciate, she's just like, she's writing her diary, and she's like, I might just have to kill Heather, like, as a joke. And then he like appears. And then I love that it really does cut to them after they have already had sex. And it was like, they just like no illusion of like him holding that over her. Like it's very clear, like she wanted to do that, they did it, and that's not even important. Yeah. Which is like in teen movies, like that's such, especially like John Hughes, it's like just the kiss was like such a big thing. Yeah. You know, it's very romanticized. So for them to just be like, teens have sex.
Yeah, let it happen. It's fine, yeah.
And we just have to, like, you know, that's just what's going to happen. So JD and Veronica accidentally kill Veronica's best friend and worst enemy. To hide their crime, they forge a suicide note. JD intended to kill her all along, and he does a little switcheroo. Veronica is like, what? Oh no. And then writes a suicide note. And this sets off a chain reaction of apparent suicides among the popular students, driven by JD's growing penchant for violence and Veronica's struggle with guilt and complicity. She keeps coming back to him. I don't get that. Yeah. I don't get it. Christian Slater sounds like Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon, and so I couldn't get in it. The whole time I was like, it's just Hiccup.
It is a thing, though. Like, there's, like, where specifically white women will be with problematic men because they'd rather not be alone. That is a thing. Mm-hmm. That's, like, the whole, like, your husband's a Republican, but you're a liberal, so you sacrifice your values for him kind of thing. So, yeah, I took it more as that, where, like, she's like, I'm willing to compromise because I don't want to be alone.
Yeah, I was like, how good is this dick, though? Like, because, like, I've made some bad decisions. Like, I'm not going to lie. I've been there. I made some bad decisions because the dick is not good. For sure. I'm like, but not murder. I draw the line of murder.
Yeah, murder's the line.
Like, fool me once, right? Fool me once.
Yeah.
Fool me twice. You'll never shame me again.
Yeah.
You know, like that's when he does it the second time, I'm like, girl,
what are you doing?
Baby girl.
Yeah.
What's going on? So as the body count rises, Veronica finally realizes JD's true nature and intentions, and it culminates in a showdown where JD attempts to blow up the school. He's like, finally, the school will mean something. Veronica manages to thwart his plan, resulting in his death. He did it himself. It's, you know, I mean, a fitting end for him taking everybody's life and framing it as a suicide. He just went and did it himself. And in the aftermath, Veronica breaks away from the toxic social structure and decides to recreate the high school dynamics. She's like, we're free. Here's the thing, we didn't have to do that. So let's talk about when your teen angst bullshit has a body count, which is what she writes in her diary so poetically with her monocle and her little like kimono looking thing. So the 80s movie landscape is rich with stories of teen angst, with John Hughes creating films that delve deeply into the teenage experience. We've all seen them. And I have never really loved them. It always took me, like, I was like, if that's what the 80s are, I don't like the 80s. And it wasn't until I saw, like, how fun the 80s actually could be that I was like, never mind, that seemed cool. Because his stuff seemed boring. But his movies depicted teens yearning for maturity, seeking to be treated as equals by adults, and striving to be understood in a world that often dismissed them. Heathers mocks this perceived depth, not only in teenagers, but in society as a whole. We're not a movie. we're not a movie. We're just regular people. So I didn't initially care for or really get Heathers. I was put off by the disingenuous acting and the obnoxious language. It took some time for me to sit with the film and to trust people who deemed it a cult classic. I was like, what are y'all seeing? And I'm totally up for, like, admitting when I'm wrong with films. Like, absolutely. Sometimes I'm not like the film guru. I don't know every single film all the time. And my media literacy classes, as effective as they are, you know, sometimes I'm sweating. I don't see it. But after all of that, I do acknowledge the impact that this film has had on films that impacted me growing up, like I said. But it wasn't until I understood that it was a direct response to the trend of teen films like Hughes is known for, films that I was never entirely into, that I then grew a kind of fondness for it. Like, I understood its place in the film sphere and, like, what it was intending to do and the importance of it existing as a, like, dichotomy to all of the other things that were, like, teens, like, ignore, like, a lot of those films, as much as they acknowledge some of the darkness of teenagehood, like, you know, Breakfast Club, I forget what his like his title is, but the kid who's just like, my dad puts out lit cigarettes on my skin. And then just moves on. Like, how do you have that and then you like transform the goth girl into a prep and you're like, we fixed it. That level of like dismissing the severity of what you just said, like what you just admitted to.
Yeah.
Like, we need to call CPS. Like, what's like, hold on.
They didn't really have it like that. Like,
yeah, I know. CPS. But I just mean like that, like, it's kind of like, oh yeah, there is some darkness in the world, but we could just put it with a bow. You know, and it's like at the end of the day, we have prom, you know, and so like that's laughable because real horrifying things were happening in the world and with the teens. And so when you're just missing them, and like that's kind of what this commentary is. It's just like there is some really bad stuff out there, and at the same, like we're not all that deep, but we all are that hurt.
Yeah,
you know, like the fact that like films of the time were emphasizing the wrong things and ignoring the other things, right? So I do want to give a big thanks and shout out to The Take, which is a great resource for media literacy and other content, and their reviews are always super helpful. And they really put this film into perspective for me mostly. And then I had like a bunch of other things that I was like pulling from, but like... So thanks to the Take. In their video, Heathers, High School is a Black Comedy, they say, Heathers primes us to look for meaning in high school drama and pain, and then it reveals that there is none. The movie's stroke of brilliance is the way it mocks the takeaway of almost all other teen movies, and that's the idea that our high school peers have a secret depth we've overlooked. I'll say I was victim to that. I thought I was deeper than I really was. I think back and I'm like, girl, you didn't have nothing going on in there.
I think you were. I'm going to get on to my section. I disagree with their take, and that's fine.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think it's like, I think it's that they're not a fantastical level of deep, or like they're not a cinematic deep. They're a regular person deep.
Yeah, and I mean, they don't need to be like immortalized in such a dramatic way. Like when anyone dies, they're like, they were this amazing hero to society, and like sometimes they're just like a guy, you know?
Yeah.
So I get it.
But I mean, the guy is still super valid and
super important. Super matters to like their family and the greater community that they lived in, and absolutely. But like, I get what you're saying. We're like, there's a regular person. They're not like this like infamous. Yeah. Everyone in the world's going to know them and remember them forever. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the thing is like everyone has main character syndrome. And that's the issue. It's like, we're not all the main characters. I'm sorry. Some of us are side characters. And also like main character doesn't always look like what we were told main characters look like. Yeah. So I think that's what I took away from it. Wasn't that like they're shallow and meaningless. It's just like, we ain't like that. And you're looking at the wrong thing. So JD is very keenly aware of the superficial lives of his classmates, and he's bitter, disillusioned, and nihilistic about it. And he believes Veronica needs only a slight push to fall under his spell. And after forging Heather's suicide note, the school erupts in false praise and concern for someone who had seemed incredibly shallow to Veronica, but has now been given depth. That's like the contrast for her. I will argue that like what we saw of Heather Chandler, like there is a darkness that was in her. There was some struggles that she had and things that like she was clearly needing to fulfill a specific role. And it's not to say that she had the best like language, right? She didn't know myriad. That's fine. That doesn't denote whether or not you are full of depth or not, or worthy of life. Like that's not like, and she was a bitch too. That's okay. People can do that. She knew what role she was playing, and she knew she had won the lottery of those roles. And I think like that in itself was really quite spectacular. I think she would be like, oh wow, that's a wonderful, like I'm glad that that's how I went out and like that I got all that attention. I feel like y'all didn't know her like that. So later, other popular kids receive similar treatment, with their deaths transforming their legacy and image forever. And Veronica writes in her diary, suicide gave Heather depth, Kurt a soul, Ram a brain, and their deaths are romanticized. And the truth is that they weren't exactly that level of deep or feeling or meaningful. There were teens who make mistakes and have limited points of view. At the end of the day, that's it. They've lived a very limited life, so that's what they're given. Nobody is, an old soul. Like we can't all be old souls. So the suicides in Heathers become a joke, and even when they influence real attempts, there is still dark humor in it that plays up. Like when there's a real attempt, they're like, oh, they failed because they weren't popular. Like I was like, that's so rough. And this serves to critique how society often trivializes and misinterprets the complexities of mental health issues by showing how easily the student body and adults accept these suicides as genuine crises and cries for help or acts of desperation. And the film underscores the superficial understanding and lack of real empathy surrounding such tragedies. They don't get it, right? So JD says he'll underline meaningful passages in Moby Dick for one of the Heathers for her suicide note. And later, Veronica fantasizes about that girl's funeral where they're blowing out of proportion the underlining of the word Eskimo.
Hey, Ghoul Scouts, just here for a little PSA instructional thing. I use the word Eskimo in this episode. It is referencing the use of it in the film Heathers, which is referencing the use of it in Moby Dick. But just for your knowledge, that is not the appropriate word to use for certain indigenous populations. It is a word that was put upon them. It is used incorrectly and is not the accepted word. So just as a clarification for that, but back to your regular scheduled programming with Ghouls. Thanks.
And he was just like, we thought she was here with us, but she was in the Antarctic, right? Like, like finding meaning in something that is essentially nothing. And that's like what they're saying these people are trying to do with the suicides, but also just like with teens. Like sometimes it is what it is. And to me, this was like before its time is essentially corn plating. So for people who don't know what corn plating is, Kat and I just learned about it. Corn plate is like this meme, an idea that came around from the movie Encanto when someone tweeted that one of the characters had corn on a plate. They're like, I never realized they had corn on the plate. And people were like, because they were like trying to, like, after we'd like beat all of the imagery and points of this film into the ground, someone was like, oh, and there's corn here. And everyone's like, and? Like, that's what you would eat in that region of the world. So corn plating is used to describe pointing out minuscule or meaningless details in a movie for the sake of keeping up with discussion about it. And the way that people were reacting to elements of the suicides felt like corn plating to me. And I also think in a meta way, people who react to Heathers in certain ways and who are like exaggerating meanings of some things or creating narratives and ideas around things that are happening in Heathers is also corn plating. So I think it's like, it's funny that it's done that to itself in becoming so infamous that it was like essentially people are highlighting meaningful words in Moby Dick and, going crazy over Eskimo, but for this film. Yeah. If that makes sense. So they also, in addition to like the exasperation of like over dramatizing the deaths and kind of glamorizing them, they put Heather C's suicide note in the yearbook. And they also passed it around English class. Like there's so much of it that's like, get real. It's so insensitive while trying to say we're being sensitive.
That's what that time period was a lot, honestly.
Yeah, get over it.
If you're ever like, why is my parent like this?
Well, watch Heathers. The take continues explaining that with Heathers, Waters, who is the writer, was actually making fun of the way that some 80s shows and documentaries, in his view, made suicide seem attractive. This happened a lot. There's also documentaries in their songs and all kinds of teenage suicide. In modern media, we've seen toxic approaches to suicide, like the show 13 Reasons Why and the book that preceded it. I will say the book put things in perspective of me, but the show seemed no. And influenced young people taking their lives. And it's actually 13 Reasons Why is referenced in Heartbreak High, where they say, like, is this your 13th reason? And so it's become like a term now to indicate like taking of your life. And it was asked, like, when something terrible happened, essentially experiencing social ruin, right? Which for Gen Z could be
a big deal,
worth that. And there's still this flip it and accepting approach to suicide, where for Gen X, it was laughable and dismissed. It was like, if you did that, who even are you? Like, who do you think you are that you're worth our attention in any type of way? Or you're better off dead, right? So the film's approach to suicide has sparked significant debate. Some viewers appreciate the film's audacity and its ability to initiate conversations about the glamorization of suicide and the often shallow response to it in popular culture. And others find the handling of such a serious topic through satire and dark humor to be insensitive and potentially harmful, fearing it might downplay the gravity of real-life struggles with mental health and possibly instigate those same reactions in the real world.
Well,
another big theme of the film is school reflects society, which we have talked about in the Ghouls in several ways, just about how you're molding people to become capitalistic cogs in the machine, and when we should be dismantling it. But another quote from JD, he's full of them, because that's the whole film is quotes. He says, "Now there is a school," I can't imitate Hiccup from How to Train Your Dragon, so I won't, but he says, "Now there is a school that self-destructed, not because society didn't care, but because the school was society." It makes me think of, like, I love the Joker when he's like, "We live in a society." He's like, "You got it, buddy." For sure. You're so, like, look at you, Edgeworth.
I think maybe for back then that was like a big deal for someone to say that. I think we're just so, like, I think we're very drenched in the knowledge of all of this, so it seems very silly to us. Whereas, like, when people were like, Barbie needed to, or like, there were people who, like, didn't think Barbie went far enough, and I think in a lot of ways that's true, but, like, it was also like the people who were like, well, yeah, but people still need to hear that. That's why no one won awards other than Ken. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, it does still need to be said to some people, just as directly and kind of silly.
Just so like we live in a society.
Yeah.
Right? We do. So thanks again to the take that supplied some helpful insight into the film's intention. And they say, screenwriter Daniel Waters says the film's message is a variation on something Ali Sheedy's character says in The Breakfast Club. She says, "When you grow up, your heart dies." So according to Waters, the Heathers version of this is, when you're 14, your heart dies. Because at 14, we begin to imitate adulthood. School represents the same social structures we are expected to navigate in the real world, quote unquote. It also trains us to become more efficient workers, adhering to capitalistic requirements that define our worth. Teenage years are among the most complicated times of our lives, as they encompass the various trainings and shapings of the individuals that we are destined to become. Right. And during this period, emotions are at an all-time high, and we learn to either wear our parents' identity like a comfortable coat, or we reject it altogether. And both of those are stressful. Right. And we seek our place within the make-believe social hierarchies that mirror those outside of school. And to do that, you do it in school. You find your place. So the take continues to explain this, saying, a caste system distracts everyone from the realization that it's all meaningless. Popularity is a proxy for things that we think would make us happy. In the same way, in the adult world, we fixate on status, money, and career achievement, and we try to climb the ladder instead of reflecting on what it all means. In school, you're doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
A recurring theme in Heathers is the tendency to attribute teenage problems to societal influences. And the film suggests that the root issue lies not in youth culture per se, but in young people mimicking the behaviors and attitudes prevalent in adult society. So, for instance, the seemingly innocent game of croquet symbolizes a cutthroat quest for domination, like societal power struggles, right? Like, it's meaningless, but they put a lot of weight on it, and you have to play your game. And even, like, Veronica's friend is just like, no, you have to take me out. Like, you have to do that to win. That's how the game is, right? And gross. That just mirrors, like, that's what she had to do in her social world. She had to get rid of that friend in order to progress, and that's why she's with the Heathers. And Veronica, like I said before, draws parallels between her friends and coworkers, also highlighting this how social dynamics mirror professional environments. An impactful moment reinforcing this idea occurs when Veronica asks her mother to treat her like a human being. And because she's like, what do you want? And she's like, I just want to be treated like a human being. And
she's
her
like,
mother
dismisses.
Yeah, she dismisses this plea because she says teenagers always ask to be treated like human beings when they already are being treated like human beings, because they have had to abide by specific social structures and like a respect and like obedience towards adults. And when they're not seeing that same thing on themselves, they think like we're not being treated equal. But what's happening is they forget that like you become equal instead of being like the hierarchy. You're not now above the adults where now they give you the respect that you were supposed to be giving them. You're on par. So now they treat you like the way that they treat other adults, which is shitty.
Yeah.
So it's like that's just how the hierarchical structure works, especially in the 80s, where it was like you have to respect your parents no matter what they do. You listen to them, you abide by them, or terrible things are going to happen. And so when you're like, I don't want to do that anymore, I want them to respect me, you're forgetting that nobody's respecting anybody out here. Nobody's doing that.
Human life, each other as people.
Yeah, just like the planet. Literally anything.
Yeah.
Their own kids. Like none of that. So she's just like, yeah, you're already being treated like a human being. And the problem is you don't want to be treated like a human being. You want to be treated better. You think you deserve better than that, and you don't, because we're all this, unfortunately, which is a joke. Like we all should be better. Yeah, we should all be better. We should all be better. Absolutely. But that's what the mom is saying. She's just like,
I got you.
Kids, they want respect and basic human decency.
Yeah, human rights.
Nobody. I don't even get that. You know, so this interaction underscores the film's critique of how adults in society at large often fail to recognize the genuine complexities and needs of teenagers, instead expecting them to conform to adult standards and behaviors, right? Like you stop being a kid and you're immediately, now you have to be an adult, which means we don't care about your feelings anymore, even though you're feeling all of them all at once times a million. In summation, Heathers uses dark humor and satire to glamorize suicide and youth imitation of adulthood. Its willingness to tackle uncomfortable topics head on and its unapologetic portrayal of teenage life make it very provocative and enduring film that continues to resonate with a lot of audiences. It became a cult classic. Despite like poor marketing and it didn't have enough money to do marketing. That's another fun thing. So it was like that image where she's like on the chalkboard, it looks like a rom-com, and then people come and they're like, oh my god, what is this? This is so triggering. So it had very bad marketing and did not make any money in the box office. And then later people were like, oh wait, it's like Jennifer's Body. It got Jennifer's Bodied. It simultaneously critiques the fanaticism behind the teenage existence while treating them like actual human beings, flawed, and though not as deep as we imagine ourselves to be, still full of potential in life if only given the proper chance to grow. So Heathers teaches us that social suicide and the death of your social standing, of conforming to society's expectations, can be a freedom. You can finally live your life according to your own desires in depth. And as JD, again, at the end, one of his great quotes says, now that you're dead, what are you going to do with your life? I was like, social suicide.
Bro, it's like, I feel that. You want me to not work anymore? I want, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I don't have to be a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
Freedom.
Love that
Kill
for
me.
us. We need freedom. And it's like, it's also like, I guess, a commentary on the fact that like teenagers generally are like the last step before you have to be an adult and do work and have unhappiness. So I guess it's a little bit of that too. But I'll get into my section. I basically say, Heathers is a nice reminder that it's never really been a good time to be a teenager. It's never been fun. No one's ever been like, I love being a teenager. Greatest time ever.
I imagine Heather Chandler would say that.
Maybe, yeah.
Those who peak in high
she
school.
had some like struggles too, or like she was not treated well by men. But
that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like she was deeply insecure, and that's why she was so mean. But it's okay. That's my own like psychoanalysis of her. But apparently, teens are perpetually misunderstood and made out to be monsters. And in watching this for the first time, and after Talk to Me, it was a little hard to compare the two. They're just such different vibes for approaching a similar message.
Yeah.
It was just a very drastic contrast where I was like, wow, this is very different.
Look at how we grew as a society.
Yeah, there's like, as you said, it's like very like it's like making it feel lighter than it is. Like it's like a sad time. So yeah, Heather's like made like haha, and it's not a haha topic. So yeah, I don't know. I totally get the critique of society's manipulation of tragedy to serve or feed a narrative that happens all the time, and it's gross. And also how teens are generally misunderstood and not supported during the years when they need the most support. Like I remember hearing my mom described something similar that when she turned 14, like her entire relationship with her parents changed, where they just like treated her like an adult and like stopped taking care of her emotionally.
Yeah, I hate adults who do that. They're like, you're 18, get out of the house.
It's gross. Like you don't just get to stop being a parent now. So like it's just like, it's like a thing. She's technically in the generation of Heather's, like she would have been a teenager when this was being filmed. So it's just like, I think she probably would watch this and relate pretty heavily. So the 80s and mental health, teen suicide, unfortunately, drastically increased between 1950 and 1990, which is largely why a film like Heather's was made when it was, as well as all the other ones that are commenting on it. The peak of suicide rates for teens specifically took place between 1970 and 1980, and then capped in the 90s. So if this came out in like 1986, it was right, or 88, I'm sorry. It was like right at where this capped. But so from that point on, it declined. And the largest contributors to increased suicide rates are multifaceted, like anything in America. The why is complicated and drenched in capitalism, racism, and misogyny. Essentially, during this time, there's a lot of social change that the government didn't want to happen. So they didn't give you any support in that transition period. This change was not accepted by systems in play. And there's also like a lot of other factors. Like the government was not about to start funding social supports to actually help people. Because under capitalism and in a racist, misogynist system, we can't be supporting families. This is like Reaganomics. Like it's happening right then. You know, as I said, they were winding up to Reagan. So when any support that did exist, when Heather's came out, I was like getting gutted, you know? So a big proponent of, or at least my theories, and based on like some of the research that I did, it kind of does seem like that the period between like the 70s and 80s was a big deal because women were entering the workforce more consistently, but without any like social supports needed to enact that safely. Like they were like, you know what, we're not going to give you any daycare. We're not going to give you any supports with that. We're not going to tell men that like they need to help contribute to the family structure. We're not going to give you anything that will make working easier or like safe for your kids.
So it's a penalty if you choose work over family.
Yeah, and it was like demonized in a lot of ways. So many white men did not appreciate this change in dynamic, and that largely benefited them. Essentially, when women more actively entered the workforce, misogynistic policies were put into place to discourage their success. Maternity leave and protections for women workers were not supported, and wage gaps were pretty large. Also, divorce was becoming more acceptable. So men were now not allowed to be left for treating their wives and families poorly. Which a lot did. They all left. A lot of people left. There's a lot of divorce during this time because they finally could.
Yeah.
Without like mass social assassination, you know, like it's
or
still like frowned
your
upon.
Financial.
Yeah. You could have credit cards and get abortions. It was a big deal. So like a lot of women left their husbands, and the misogyny ingrained into social structures made conflicts between men and women even more prevalent. And this is relevant to Heather's because what we see is like the parents like clearly don't like each other. They don't even talk. Like they're together. They don't talk to the kid either. And that's like a big proponent of that is because a lot during this time, there's a shift, as I said, like to both men and women working, at least in some households, not in like the wealthy ones where they didn't have to, but like this made it so there was less availability mentally for both parents to be present for the children. So essentially, increased divorce rates, etc., and then more single moms as a result of that. And even when both households and single people the ones that did stay together were stretched thin when it came to capacity of supporting their kids, because there wasn't any kind of like structure in place to support them other than school. And as a result of these combined factors, school became more heavily relied on to raise children. But school was not equipped for this. As you can see, all the teachers in that school, except for maybe one, but like she like performatively cared. They did not care about those kids at all. And there was not enough of them to adequately support them.
To care.
Yeah. And like they were just not equipped for this. And during Reagan's presidency, he cut like an insane amount of money from education. So they were also just like gutted financially, while given this like really big responsibility essentially of raising an entire generation of kids, because the parents just didn't have time. So they were not equipped. There was not training. They didn't have like mental health first aid or like trauma informed care or even any kind of like mental health training. It was like, teach them how to be factory workers and call it a day. But they didn't have their parents at home, so they needed parental guidance and figures. And during this time, that was just like, the parents were very hands off. That was like a transition socially, that like parents like were very much like, you do your thing, friend. I'll see you when you're a grown up, I guess.
Well, that was like the latchkey era too. So for young kids, it was like you just go out, you come in when the street lights go on, and that's why there was like so many children abductions, because the kids would just get into cars with people because they're just out on their bike talking to strangers. Like, nobody cared, nobody was home.
Yeah, and because of this, like, the teachers, unfortunately, just, like, I'm sure there were some, but, like, they were not able to be authentically supporting all the students in the very unique ways they needed to be. And the goal of schools before this, as I said, was to keep kids busy and prepare them for future factory jobs to eventually become workers, not to support their emotional well-being and self-actualization as human beings. And the economic stress of this climate, the lack of therapy and the absence of governmental supports, in fact, like the gutting of governmental supports for these changes, increased home stresses. And this is why during this time, there were the commercials in 1975 that ran on television reminding parents to hug their kids because they're people. I had to remind them that their kids were people.
And to care about them. And remember they're there.
Yeah, PSA. And it was like a big thing. So
drink milk and hug your kids.
So like it had to be a widespread, like the suicide rates were crazy, and I'm going to get into that, but like they were super high, and it makes sense considering all those factors. And there were additional contributing factors that increased these rates that are theorized, including in-home guns. There was significantly more guns readily available. Gas ovens, that was like the 1950s suicide spike, was that people could just stick their heads in ovens and be gone. It's more like if you don't have adequate time to think about the decision, because it's like an impulse thing a lot of the time. Like if you sit with it long enough, you might not do it. But if you're given a quicker option, you're more likely to be like, okay, I don't have to think about this more than a few minutes and I can just go. So the increase of guns, the shifts in control placed on teens to conform to societal norms, with schools being their only real place for guidance. The problems with schools were like exacerbated because they didn't have emotional support at home. So the school was like their primary guidance for how to be a person. And I don't know if you remember school, but it didn't do a good job. Even still now, for me, like I had a very bad time in school. I had some really kind teachers, absolutely. But like, if that was like the only thing that was available, I would not have made it. And there was also a lot of hatred and bullying towards anyone deemed different. Like it was very much like push the pegs down.
Kind of thing. The nail. That sticks
hammer
out.
the nail. Exactly. So for sexuality, gender, race, neurodivergence, etc., like all these things were demonized. And if you didn't fit into the factory worker peg, you were hammered down, essentially.
Yeah, and there's so many harmful words. Like language was so harmful in that time period. Like it was weaponized just for being kind of different. And then, language hurt.
Yeah, and there was like a lot of like, just like, they would just like torture kids for like just being themselves, to the point where like no one could be themselves. And that's why everyone was really sad. So because of these things, during the 1970s and 80s, over 49,496 youth aged 15 to 24 committed suicide. which comes from the surveillance summary of youth suicide in the United States from 1970 to 1980 from the CDC. And they continue saying the suicide rate for this age group increased 40%, from 8.8 deaths per 100,000 population in 1970 to 12.3 per 100,000 in 1980. While the rate for the remainder of the population remained stable, young adults, specifically 20 to 24, had approximately twice the number and rate of suicides as teenagers, and between 15 and 19 years old. The Western United States specifically had consistently higher youth suicide rates from 1970 to 1980 than any other of the three regions, North Central, Northeastern, and Southern. However, the difference in rates had narrowed substantially by 1980 because rates for each of the other regions also increased. So they eventually equaled out over this period. And the method of suicide changed significantly from 70s to the 80s. The proportion of suicides committed from firearms increased for both young males and females. And the proportion of both male and females committing suicide by poisoning declined. So people used to take a lot of pills or poisons, and then they stopped doing that because guns became available. Yeah. It didn't stop. Like, it was still like 28%, I think. It was still like a pretty high percentage. But just gun usage was higher. Yeah. Well, I mean, guns and hanging were the two highest.
Well, it's like one of those you could, like, with poisoning, like, they can pump your stomach. Mm-hmm. You have a higher rate of, like, surviving that.
Yeah. Where a gun, no. Yeah. So, yeah, essentially, those introductions more heavily into society and like handguns, like more compact weaponry, also contributed to this. So essentially the changes were more marked among females who in the past had most commonly committed suicide through poisoning. They also started to transition into gun usage. Data show that among persons 15 to 24 years of age, young white male adults, 2024, had the highest suicide risk specifically. So honestly, JD and ending how he did makes sense in the context of this information. Yeah. There's also research from the National Library of Medicine that examines the data of different age groups and suicide between 1970 to 2002. And the research analyzed the contextual factors that could influence increased suicide rates, such as economy, social supports, drug and alcohol availability, and more, suggesting that to improve economic stability and growth opportunities would likely decrease the risk of suicide in teens and adults, essentially linking back to what I said last week, that having supports and social systems in place that actually support people and their needs decreases the chances that someone will come to the conclusion that they are a burden and don't want to be here anymore. We should take care of each other. Community. Scientifically. And with our youth dealing with a somewhat hopeless future, rates like these seen in the late 1980s could rise again as the economic burden of a failing economy, a dying planet, and a dystopian future discourage people from wanting to be here. The data from recent years is showing a rise, not specifically with youth, but you know how the number that I said for the whole entire period of 1970 to 1980, almost that many people died alone in 2021.
Jeez. 2021, that makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah. And they came to this conclusion because of the drop of rates during the economic upturn of the 90s, essentially, when things got financially more secure and a future seemed a little more hopeful. A lot of less people took things into their own hands. So when unemployment and the economy was stable, it just didn't seem like as much of an option. So young people had job opportunities on the horizon and hope for the future. So if we want the world to seem less hopeless, we need to fix a lot of things. And the next part of my section is the Heather Hydra and starting to pick up on a systemic oppression. So what was really interesting about this film for me was that it made progress towards recognizing the impacts of systemic oppression, but without like quite getting there because it was the 80s. Very close to the point, but likely because of the time it was released, just didn't take the next step. And like, as you say, like, it does feel like pretty insensitively. And what I mean by this is there are so many calls out of society and how it impacts youth, as well as how participating in the system successfully requires burying others as well as your true self. stepping on the roses. Many of the characters are just performances of people who actively step on others to get ahead. Being popular is done the same way one would succeed in society within capitalism, stepping on others and making others feel like they need to conform or fall in line. Like if you think of any middle manager and a corporate company. And in the death of Heather and the rise of other Heather, Veronica starts to point that the replacing of the Hydra heads, like the Heathers replacing each other, is something that will keep happening within the social structure. Like something needs to change within the social structure. And that's like recognizing that it's not an individual issue, it's a systemic issue, but without like actually saying that or letting it end with that in mind.
Yeah.
So like it was like, oh, we kind of see it, but they just went right over it.
Yeah, she took it. She took the scrunchie.
Yeah. So in the death of Heather and the rise of other Heather, Veronica starts to point that replacing the heads of the Hydra is something that will keep happening, that to eliminate one threat, you were just making space for another, like a power vacuum. And what this film misses in some ways is that they only do the first step of what would be necessary to actually changing problems, which is that Veronica stops being a passive and begrudging participant in the like cruelty that she's witnessing and starts actively contributing to her ecosystem. First, she murders some people, but then, you know, starts to be like, oh, maybe we be kind to each other and I'm going to take that on. But some of this is done through murder, as I said, but it's not until the end that she starts to realize she can stand up and say she's not going to do these things anymore. And the issue here is mostly that she seizes power from within the system, which is such like the demographic thing to do. Becoming a player in it, but changing what is considered acceptable to be more inclusive of difference. Like not really, like you can only do so much change within the system.
Yeah. And also like what's going to happen to Heather? And why do you think they're going to listen to you and not Heather?
Yeah. It's a very idealistic approach from such a nihilistic film. And they treat it kind of like how you would expect a teenager to, in that they're still looking at it on a very individual level, keeping the onus on themselves to make the change and not really calling attention to the root or cause. But again, these are teenagers, so I'm not exactly expecting them to have the answers. It's more like the adults who are writing the scripts. But it's fine. I'll say as unhinged and problematic as Jason Dean was, and I'm sure that was the point, he did in many ways call out real flaws within society, much like the comic book supervillains. Every evil character generally thinks they're doing the right thing and do have some points, you know, fulfilling some kind of necessary purpose. And like also it's like they're a response to a societal need. You can't just reject an entire group of people who's like, I'm struggling. And you can't be like, oh, they just need to go die. It's not the solution. We have to figure out a way to like help each other. And sometimes people get in the way of their own help. I get that. But like, I don't know. It's like he's a super villain in that he's a little too unhinged and it's not really relatable. But he did have a few points where I'm like, all right, I see what you're trying to do. You didn't do that at all. But I see what you were saying.
You said it with your mouth.
Yeah, you said it with your mouth. You did not say it with your actions at all. But you said it with your mouth. And
points.
Yeah, like kind of. And yeah, so I get it though, because each character is supposed to be this dramatized representation of a person and not an actual person. So like he had to be that extra, you know. But he makes valid points about how school is just a practice version of society, as Gabe got into, and that to do well in school, it operates just like you would in a job. And that was like so much the point of this film. So to be popular, you have to participate in a system that rewards cruel behavior. You have to be Heather or the boys.
Or Heather.
Or Heather. Or Heather, yeah. Well, one of the Heathers was nice. She actually had some like emotional depth.
Yeah. Poor Heather.
Yeah.
If everyone jumped off a bridge, would you? And she was like, probably.
Yeah. No, she's sweet. And the issue with him mostly was that he did not have empathy, and that was like my main qualm with like a lot of the film. And I think it was on purpose, like I get it, but also it was like there is no empathy like from the adults, from the kids to each other. Even once Veronica gets it, like she didn't view JD with empathy, she didn't view any of the other Heathers with empathy, she didn't like, you know, Like, you had to earn her kindness, kind of. And she didn't have empathy for the people she actually did genuinely harm. So,
yeah, and she never like actually feels bad.
Yeah, and like she murdered some people. Like, yeah, they were a problem, but murder.
But she shot that boy. She shot that boy.
Yeah, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. This film like lacked a lot of empathy, and that brings me to the line of the film that I think accurately sums up society during this time, which Gabe invoked it as well. I'm going to invoke the same quote that Gabe mentioned above, where Veronica states, "I just want to be treated like a human being," and her mom's like, "What do you mean you are?" And I interpreted this that the issue is not that they're noticing. The issue is that they are noticing inequities in how humans are treated and want that to be different, want it to be fair and just. But the mother point, in my opinion, is that we don't treat human beings fairly in a capitalistic system. So the problems that Veronica thinks being treated like a human being should be different. It's like that's the issue, is that she's not conforming, that she's not, the peg isn't getting hammered down. Like, it's like, how dare you tell me like we need to be different? And essentially, that society doesn't treat humans fairly, empathetically, and with any care for their individuality or authentic selves, because it's a system. As I said, it gets so close. So she got the point without fully getting the point, that to do well in society that prioritizes wealth and exploitation, being treated like a human being sucks. And like, the characters in the film are calling out the flaws of society and the control hypocrisy of society, and are met with adults that basically say, that's how it's always been. What do you want me to do about it? Yeah. And that's how like, I was treated. Anyone relate to the frustration of hearing that when presenting someone with valid concerns?
Yep. How many hands can I put up?
Yeah. And the adults in the film are the same as the high schoolers, as you say, Gabe. I think the fact that for much of the film, Veronica is just an unenthusiastic participant in the cruelty of her peers, kind of acting like the adults in her life who just take things for what they are, is like on purpose, obviously. And the shift away from just dealing with the atrocities of the world as a passive participant is also important. Like, she shifts away from that and starts to take a hands-on role. I just wish she went further. That's all. Also, one thing that I really disagree with in this film is that they suggest teenagers are without depth. And it's like one of my pillars. I realize, like, one of the things I'm like very passionate about is like, I'm like, empathy is so important. It's so hard, and you need to have it, and like, you need to really focus in. So if you're saying someone doesn't have depth, you're like removing your empathy, and it like upsets me. So misunderstanding their actions and the reasons for doing things, absolutely, they do that. But I don't think that means teens are without depth. I think, as you said, Gabe, it's like they're not movie depth. Like, they're just people depth. But like, I think every human is unique and has a whole spectrum of experiences and emotions and motivations for their actions. Understanding that everyone has their own lives and frustrations and motivations is a large part of empathy and like being kind to others. It's like, maybe that wasn't about me. Maybe they're just having a really hard day. And most of the time, that is true. Usually, when people are jerks, it usually doesn't have much to do with you, and more to do with the fact that of all the things that they've experienced their whole life and how they don't know how to process that and are taking it out on the people around them. So, yeah, I just feel like it's a large part of empathy, which is something the film lacked. And there are absolutely exceptions to that rule, and that there are people who are just so detached from themselves that their sense of why that they don't, and their sense of why that they don't have the capacity to authentically express that to others. Like, there are people who don't see their own depths, and because of that, like, just are harmful. Or also people who seek validation from the same systems that harm them and then perpetuate that harm. So like, if those people did not exist, we would not have a system in the first place. Like, obviously they have to exist, but I'm just saying, like, if those people did not exist, we would not have a system in the first place. So I think there's a problem with the perpetuators of the system and harm. And in the grand scheme of things, their intent doesn't matter more than their impact of harm. So it's like, I'm not saying excuse them, but I'm just saying we need to like recognize we can't remove their depth entirely, because then you're also kind of removing their ability to change or be held accountable to their actions. And I think it's more accurate that society deeply misunderstands its youth, prioritizing them as workers and how they can contribute to those in power rather than focusing on them as people. Heather, Kurt, and Ram were problems, absolutely, and the harm they perpetuated matters much more than their why. I'm not saying that. But to dehumanize them and removing their humanity and their capacity for empathy, we are basically saying that the only solution for the Heathers, Kurts, and Rams of the world is to kill them. And for some of them, maybe that's true. But also, I feel like that's like a real effed up perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, I get it sometimes. And then also I'm like, but if they're without depth, they're without redemption. And I just feel like if we're going to have a restorative justice based society that like gives people a chance to grow and change, if we don't want like Gen Z's problem that they have, like where they can't fail gracefully, like they can't fail ever and they have to like always be correct and right, like it just really limits growth. And there's some people who are unredeemable, absolutely, but like I don't know if Heather was unredeemable. Like honestly, like Ram and Kurt did some effed up things, but I'm just like, I don't know. I feel like if we're removing their depth and like ability to grow as people, we're removing their opportunity for redemption. And like maybe they need to be shut down for a while and then come back when they're older and they've learned their lesson and whatever. But like there's no pulling them back in that understanding of the world. Like if we feel that way, we might as well just be Jason Dean, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
like they should have, like these people should have had consequences for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's just, I don't think death was the consequence. And then rewriting them because now they don't have consequence.
No. They get
now,
like
Kurt and Ram have sympathy.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like, yeah, it's a whole thing. And it's like, yeah, it's like if we want a restorative justice-based thing, we have to give that to kids. Like these are kids is more so where I'm at. Like it's like they were very flawed kids who deserve consequences. But as you said, Gabe, maybe not death. Because if you're a kid, you have eventually the chance, hopefully everyone can eventually have the chance depending on where you are at in your stage of life. But like the chance to be better tomorrow. You know, and if you're like removing that person's ability to do that, that sucks.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, they're a product of their environment. Like it's very clear, like they were mimicking what was said. It's all these kids seem to understand that they were just the next round of the same people. And it was Veronica who was like, I don't want to be the next round of the same people. But at the same time, I am benefiting from the same round of the same people. I just know something is up. Like, yeah. So like you were saying, it didn't quite get there because she's still, like, I don't think she really fully understood it. And she wasn't an incredibly sympathetic character. I don't think she was supposed to be. Like, she's obviously very flawed too. But yeah, I think because of that, like, I have a hard time when there's no redeemable character or no character that I can really truly root for, and I never really felt like rooting for Veronica. I was like, girl, like if you're supposed to be so deep, you know, like then why aren't you catching this? Like why are you, like, you know?
And the characters I would have rooted for are like so far in the background, you know?
Yeah. And I just genuinely think that this is a film that was made for a different audience than myself. And I respect that exists. And I think, you know, in expanding and unpacking it and also like hearing, you know, your section count, I do feel like I understand it better. And like, I'm glad it exists, you know, for saying what it did. It makes me similarly sad to the fact that like that time existed and that those people felt that way. And that they still feel this way, right? Like, you know, like it kind of makes me sad because it does a really good job of reflecting what was really happening and what the real problems were of that time, in a way that those other films and documentaries and what have you were not doing. Like, I think it in being a Black comedy and making fun of it and being just so over the top, I felt like it was more honest than a lot of other films of that time. For that reason, fair, it just still sucks. And it was still a product of that time when people said awful, gross things. And again, I get like, you're
comedy wasn't really funny. Yeah.
It wasn't funny to me. It was like, what are we doing? It's like, ew. Yeah. But again, I get it. And I think like, if you try to remove that from the film, then it's not this film. you're making something else. So I think for what it is, I think it did a good job. It's just, it took me a minute to really get into it and to appreciate it for what it is. I will not say that it's like my favorite. Yeah, I don't know if it's my cult classic, you know?
Yeah. And I guess another thing I'll like clarify is like, I was just like, I think it's also important, like, because they're kids, it's like their perpetuation is such a smaller scale of perpetuation than a lot of adults. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's also really important too. Like, it would be different if they were like murdering people and like ruling an oppressive country doing messed up stuff.
They're a smaller reflection of a bigger issue. So this is just like a closer look at what is happening outside all the time.
Yeah,
because they are their parents and they are wealthy. So
so they're going to have influence one day. Yeah, I see.
Absolutely. I see. So yeah. So I think like, you know, information. I think we get it now. I don't know if we like, again, don't love it, but we do get it, and I do like, and people who cult classic love it. Absolutely, I get you doing that. I just like it wasn't made for me, and that's okay. And just like nothing of that time really was or would be. I don't think I'll ever like, I don't have the nostalgia glasses for the 80s because I wasn't there, you know. My nostalgia glasses are like the aughts, you know, like late 90s when I was conscious of like what was happening around me and I could remember some of it. 80s not gonna be me. And I was not born in the wrong decade.
No. Me neither.
No, I don't want that much hairspray in my hair. I have mousse in my hair and it's so sticky. I hate it.
I don't think I could get that dressed up every day. Like, I remember getting dressed up in like middle and high school, like pretending, like, you know, trying.
Yeah, a blazer every day. No, thank you.
I don't think I could do it.
That's too much clothes.
Warm. Yeah.
I'm from Florida. We don't wear blazers. That's crazy. Anyway, cool. So that was this episode. We have another episode for Gen X next week, and then we're going to finally get to the millennials. We did it, y'all. We found them. We got two that we're going to cover. Some surprise, some not a surprise. It'll be fun. So stay tuned for our next episode in 2 weeks about Jawbreaker, which I'm very excited to see if it holds up to my nostalgia glasses.
Yeah.
If I put it on,
I never saw it, so I'm very excited to watch it.
Yikes. Like, we'll see. Yeah. So stay tuned to just see if you get that reaction from Gabe of being like, uh-oh. I liked this when it was on cable TV. There's a lot of those films where I watch back and I'm like, I was telling people this is my favorite movie. What? No. But excellent. So don't get married.
Let your kids, and hopefully if they do, your kids are like, okay.
Yeah, your kids do not blow up the school for society. Don't do that, baby. Don't do that, baby. We're a fixed society.
Let's be nice to each other. And take care of each other. Build community. Grow gardens.
Yeah. The world is really dark and scary. And it gets increasingly that. It's so hot. It's so miserable. Nothing is doing what it was supposed to do. No. And it's scary. So let's all hold hands through the dark.
Let's all hold hands. That's what I want.
Okay.
Across America. I'm kidding. Okay, bye.